And hey, Ron, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing, Diana?
I'm good. I'm good. Welcome, everyone, to On the Flip Side. Every Monday, I host an episode of On the Flip Side, and we'll talk about either the first Monday, we'll always be talking about mindset, and every other Monday after that, we talk about anything related to real estate. My name is Diana Lizarazo, and today's guest speaker is Ron Cotteau. Ron Cotteau deals with permits. He's a permit advisor, so he's going to be sharing us all the basics, getting us into the permits. I'm so excited to have you on because I feel like this is a topic where a lot of people get confused in or get stressed out in. So let's have you reduce our stress. Thanks so
Yes,
much for
yes.
coming on.
Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate you inviting me on to the flip side to share some of my wisdom and knowledge with your group here. And I gotta say, these type of this is one of the questions I get asked all the times. Ronald, do I need a building permit? And my question is always yes. There's never a time that I say no, but there are instances when you may not need one. But for the type of people that we are working with, real estate investors and home owners who are doing substantial renos and flipping properties or possibly adding multi-units to their dwellings, those absolutely need building permits and a whole lot more. And we're certainly going to get into some of that for sure on this call.
Awesome, awesome. And so, okay, so let's get started then. Let's start with what is your definition of building permits basics? Like what do you, if someone came to you for the first time, what are the basics that you would want them to know about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, some of the basics is one is that you need one in Ontario. So I am a BCI designer, right? I started doing design work all the way back in 2008, right? So I'm approaching 20 years just doing design work. And the thing is, when you're working on a project, especially in Ontario, you need to have a building permit, regardless. There's very few projects that you may not need one. When it comes to the basics of building permits, is that you need to have it done by a professional, someone who is knowledgeable in the Ontario Building Code. And we'll talk a bit about that because when we talk about submitting a building permit, there's a few aspects that it incorporates. So you need to make sure that when you're submitting a permit, that it complies with the Ontario Building Code. So the Ontario Building Code governs the construction of building, that's the health and safety standards of buildings in Ontario or structures, right? But however, that's the Ontario Building Code. There's another very basic understanding that everyone needs to know, and that is zoning. Zoning is what each municipalities have to determine or to govern the characteristic of their neighborhoods. So those two things go together to make the design component of your building permit application. So zoning, which is municipal zoning bylaws, and then the second is Ontario Building Code. When you are submitting a building permit drawing, it must comply with those two pieces of regulations, and you must work with somebody that is skilled in navigating those two pieces of documents. And I say pieces, but the reality is these are actually very thick pendulums that contains a lot of information. So it's really important that the person who is doing the design, submitting the design, understands that those two documents are very important. So that will be the very, very basic part of it. Now, we can talk a bit more about what are some of the other things, components that go along with a building permit. Should I?
Let's actually start with, I was just thinking, even let's say speaking about the zoning or the building permits, what are some basics that the investors should take care of first or kind of know or bring to you so that, or even just, to help you out to get things quicker, ask questions quicker? What kind of, for each one, what kind of information would you want them to kind of look into first and just have those basics there even for themselves?
Mhm. Yeah, well, the reality is that is when we work with clients, we actually flip that question. You say what it is we can do for you. So we don't want the investor or the homeowner to do any of that sort of work. One, because they are most likely untrained in navigating those documents, which is extremely exhausting. It's like me going to my doctor and my doctor asking me, do I know how the procedure that I want to do I know what it entails, right? I'm hoping the doctor would tell me what the procedure entails. And that's what we do. We just simply ask, what is the problem? What it is you're trying to achieve? What is your goal for getting this property, or what is your goal for renovation? And that question usually is followed by what is the address of the property, right? So once we know what is your goal and what is the address of the property, we can now take that back to our desk and we can then determine what is the highest and best use in the scenario where an investor wants to add multiple dwelling units to a property. We would then determine what is the highest and best use based on the local municipal bylaw, right? So the zoning code will tell us what is the density that's allowed there, what is the parking requirements, what are the setbacks, what is the maximum heights. So those are the things that we will determine. So all we ask investors or homeowners to do is just simply give us an address and we'll do our magic on the back end.
Awesome, awesome. That's great to know. And so, okay, and then now you wanted to get into the basics of what was it again, like the particulars?
Yeah, so a building permit application consists of more than just the review of the drawings. So I'll say this, a building permit really is designed to speak to 4 different groups, right? The first group would be the owner of the property, the real estate investor. They want to be able to know what are we proposing, and how what are we proposing going to create or generate the highest and best use ultimately for that property. So that's the first group of person that the design work that we offer needs to speak to. The second group is the person that is actually reviewing the design work. That's the plan examiner. Within most municipalities, there are plan examiners. In some municipalities, they have CBOs that are actually doing that depending on the size. Those chief building officials. And then the third group of people that we want to speak to is the contractor, because the contractor needs to know what's going to be built, but also they take that set of drawings that we produce and they actually use that to quote, to produce an accurate quote. And then the fourth group of people are the building inspectors. So the building inspectors, those drawings need to address the building inspection component. It needs to be able to show the inspector what is being done and make so that the inspector can review the work completed, that make sure that it aligns with the design work. So those are the 4 groups. So, but let's talk about the first group, the investor, right? The homeowner. When we're working with them, some of the basic things that they need to understand is that the first and foremost thing that we need to comply with is that we need to comply with the zoning and the zoning bylaws and the Ontario Building Code. And I like to put it when I speak to clients, I say, like, we are the chauffeurs. We are the chauffeurs, you are the passenger. We are going to take you to whichever destination you'd like to go. We'd help you achieve your ultimate end goal of getting the permits for your multiplex, for your deck, whatever that is. However, in doing so, we will give you advice and show you where it is your plans to achieve that goal or reach your destination might be hindered by traffic. Let's say, for example, right? Because if you're sitting in a limo and you tell the guy, like, you want to go downtown Toronto, and you say, like, I want to go down there fast, right? Now it's up to him to decide whether or not which is the fastest route. And that's what we really help our clients do. Help them the fastest route to make sure that they comply with all their zoning bylaws, their Ontario Building Code, and any other third-party sort of authorities having jurisdiction that may need to get involved. So I know I'm saying a whole lot here, but that's only one group. That's only the real estate investors. Now we have the second group. The second group is the plan examiners. The plan examiners need a few different documents. I'll just list them out real quickly. But one, for a basic bungalow being converted into a 2-unit dwelling, they need to have drawings as architectural drawings that reflect all of the necessary scope of work, all of the notations. All those notations need to comply with the Ontario Building Code and the zoning bylaw. So you'll hear me going through those 2 documents a lot throughout this process. Then, of course, what they have to do as well is that we also have to submit an application for demolition and construction. That's filled out with all the information, ownership information, who is building it, is it going to be Tarian, does it have to have Tarian warranty and so forth. All that information needs to go in there. Then there's a Schedule 1, a design of information form that has to be filled out. That's my responsibility. Fill all that information in so that the city knows that I'm qualified to take responsibility for doing this type of work, right? And then, of course, there's any sort of supporting documents. For example, we might be building a deck. We need to submit any sort of supplementary standards, any sort of engineering type of considerations for that particular deck, let's say, for example. And now we'll submit all of that, and that makes up the basics for what the plan examiner needs to see. Now, I know I'm going through a lot. Let me know when to stop. Let me know when you want to jump in, okay? So
No problem. It's all good. I was actually going to ask about, I think, which it sounds like it probably would be the same if it's not just like a residential home, but like a bigger building of a multifamily.
yeah.
Is it the same documents? And obviously, except for the supplementals, which probably would be different, right?
Yeah, well, you know what is actually a little more robust when you're doing larger buildings for sure, but it does include what it is we spoke about in addition to some things. So I think that's how we met, right? We would do some consulting on a larger project, and basically once you're doing a project, well, what did I ask you guys for? I said, like, can I get the address of the property so I can do what is called a suitable review? It's sort of a really quick, kind of a really preliminary type of feasibility, just so you understand what's it going to take. And one of the things that we discovered was that, or like on many projects, in fact, most people are taking like mixed use buildings and they want to convert it into residential. Well, once you go down that path, you must have an REC completed, which involves a phase 1 or phase 2, depending on how bad the site is. So that's something that has to be done. Right. In many cases as well, when you start getting into developing any type of property or changing the use, chances are you may have to get an actual survey completed, because now you may have to go through the site plan approval process. That's additional documentation, additional time, and additional money. Right. So we try to help clients in advance learn these items or understand what they're getting into, so that way they don't stumble or are unprepared when they get to that point. And trust me when I say I have stumbled in some of these processes when I was untrained in them. So I would not advise anyone to go through those processes just thinking they will wing it, right? There's no winging it when it comes to this stuff. Right. So
yeah, winging it is such a good idea when it's dealing with permits.
Yeah, there's no winging it. In fact, we had clients that came to us in the past, and we said to them, here's the service we offer, here's a proposal and so forth. They're like, well, I can do this myself. Well, in some cases, you have the option to do it yourself. You have the option to do it yourself in some cases if you are going to be occupying the property yourself. If it's a rental property, you cannot do it yourself. But I had a client that came to me and they decided that our price point based on our service wasn't aligned. And they said, well, you know what? They'll go on Kijiji, they'll find someone. So they did go on Kijiji and they found someone. Well, they also found a lot of problems, right? And about 2 months later on, they came back to us with a laundry list of items that the city came back with, right? The city came back with at least about 30 items they wanted addressed. And this was a simple 3-unit conversion, right? So I looked at it and I said, well now it's going to be problematic now, because now I have to figure out what was done before. Now I have to come out the site, reassess what was completed, what wasn't, why are some of these comments coming back. So we end up going through the whole process. long and short of the story is, was a successful end for the client. But my point is, work with the right team that understands how to do this. Like, for example, we have been working on 2-unit conversions, 3 units, 4 units, multiplexes, even up to 6 units is one of the single family conversions we have done. And I will say that over the past 7 years, we have done easily, we're into like about 500 plus building permits submitted successfully, right? So we have a ton load of experience working with real estate investors and homeowners. Sometimes we're doing new builds and stuff. So I would say definitely work with the people that understand the requirements, because you may think you're going to hire this big name architect to build your 4-plex or 5-plex. Well, I'll say this, I have personally reviewed a lot of architects and engineer work. They do great work, but if they're not specialized in the area that that's ultimately going to take you to your end goal, then you can end up in a situation where you have problems. There's things that are missed, right? So it's a really important point.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I totally know what you mean. I feel like this is almost like a rite of passage for new investors, that they say something is always too expensive, because we have it. My husband has it happen all the time too with the renovations. You know, they're like, it's like for some reason, a rite of passage. They don't want to spend that much money, and then they end up, you know, with the renovation, same thing. Like, as you said, perma, same thing with renovations, right? They end up coming back, having my husband have to fix all the mistakes that happened. And then it's just exactly said, like, especially, I feel like with drawings, at least, it's not as bad, but my husband hates working on other people's work too, because it's just like, are the corners straight? Are this done? Like, how is this done? Like, how do you do it? And you're just like, you're trying to patchwork on the work that's been done. So I feel like advice for everyone. If it's your first project of whatever new type, even of investment, I feel like go like that for the people with the most experience, at least in the first time around, so you actually understand, know properly how everything is done, how it should be seen. And then if you want to go cheaper, then at least in the second round, third round, maybe you can do it, or at least you realize what it is that you're paying for. Like, you start learning the value of what it is that you get. Because same thing, like, for example, for us, we come with experience with renovations. So we'll hire cheaper subcontractors, but we know that comes with babysitting, right? And we know we have to babysit them a lot, but we're paying for that because, for example, like, my husband's always on site anyway. So we're okay to pay cheaper labor because we know that, I mean, he's on site and he can monitor and make sure everything's done. But if you're not going to be that type of investor that's babysitting, you gotta go with someone that knows what they're doing.
Absolutely, 100%. I completely agree with you, and you know, there's really truth in that. There's pros and cons to everything, and just like in project management, you know, like there's a triple constraint. There's time, quality, and money, right? You can only choose two, folks. You can only choose two, right? So if you want quality and you want time, you got to pay the money, right? And in fact, I would even go and say you can only choose one, because quality is oftentimes a non-negotiable, right? Because so really and truly, what do you want? You want it fast, you got to pay the money. You want it cheap, you got to give enough time for it to be done cheaply. And oftentimes that impacts quality, so of experience, right? So the reality is, you know, we like to say, and when we work with an investor, we offer design service, but this is truly something that I am passionate about. You know, I'm coming into this residential field, not as someone who is just passionate about it, but someone who has spent upwards of 8 years in school studying for this stuff. And what I mean, architecture and construction management. And, you know, I worked in commercial design and construction for 20 plus years. And then following that, no, I should say 15 plus years. Then following that, I decided that I was going to compress the skills and educational experience that I had and begin working with real estate investors. So when you work with someone, it's not a matter of it doesn't matter what question you're asking, it's who you're asking it to. right? You know, if you come to me and you ask me like, hey, I want to fix my molar or something like that, like you're asking the wrong person the question, right? I am not that guy. But you ask me anything about buildings, that's what it is. I know in depth. I know from both the commercial side. In fact, anybody will tell you that's who has spoken to me that yeah, I'm the building guy. I know this stuff. This is my passion from since I was a teenager, very young actually. Right.
Awesome, awesome.
So
And
with
so
that,
was there any other particulars that you wanted to talk about, or did we cover them all?
yeah, so we're gonna jump back into the last two. So we kind of jumped off of from the plan examiners. So as I mentioned, they got some things they need in order to review the drawing in its entirety. And you know, you sort of asked the question, are there other things for bigger projects? Well, that's depending on the scope. You may need mechanical designs. Structure is almost always required, structural design. You're always moving some post or some wall or something like that that will require structural. And then of course there's like some of the things you would need for if you're building, let's say, a new build garden suite. In fact, we're doing quite a number of those in Hamilton right now. And you know, there's a little bit of a requirement where you may require a grading and drainage plan. So you have to get a site survey completed and a civil engineer to do a grading and grading plan. So all these things are additional documentation they may need in order to do a complete and comprehensive review of the project before it is issued. And mark my words, I'm not saying approved. The drawings are only issued when the plan examiner is finished with it, because the city does have the right to revoke a permit if they missed something, right? So just also keep that in mind. Now I'll move on to the third group of people, which is the contractors. So what are the basics when it comes to this? I'm just going to say this right now. One of the core things to determine a quality contractor is, do they have the ability to read construction documents? When I mean that, can they read drawings? Can they read specifications? Do they know to navigate the building code at least a little bit, right? Because this really helps to expedite the process when it comes to speaking with the building inspector on site, which is the fourth group of people. But your contractor must understand how to read drawings. And if I were to be honest, and it's a sad thing for me, actually it's a stressful thing for me, but it's a sad thing for everyone else. But the reality is I've found that maybe about 30% of contractors actually know how to read drawings. Most contractors, they just ask for the building permit just to stick it on the window. But they never go back to those drawings, right? They just like to talk about what needs to be done because they're good at their skill. They're good at swinging a hammer. They're good at installing stuff. They're good at coordinating trades, but they don't know how to read drawings if there's problems. And it's frustrating for me because I now have to constantly babysit these guys with a bunch of questions about stuff that's on the drawings. And I always would say, go back to the drawings, go to page A1.3, and you'll find the answer to the question there, right? So that's one of the things I'll say is one of the basic, your contractor must know how to read drawings. They must understand, of course, how to read those drawings because that will also determine if they're going to give you an accurate quote on your job. If they don't know how to read drawings, then they're missing key items. There will be changes on your project and so forth. So, but
that's
those
a good point. I never thought of that. Yeah, you would want to make sure that, yeah, the quote could be actually wrong because it's missing things that they didn't pay attention to that the drawings speak about. 100%.
Exactly. Well, you know, like, so one of the things we must do when we're doing, let's say, a multifamily conversion is that you may need to have a ceiling that's an F8D or an F9D type wall system based on the supplementary standards in the building code. That specific system requires that you have 1/2-inch resilient channel, 2 sheets of 5/8 type X drywall, right? So a contractor may look at it and just say, oh, you need to have a finished ceiling. Well, that's very different from the system that's spec. So they may spec 1/2-inch drywall directly attached to the underside of the joist, right? Whereas they just missed 3 components that can easily have added about maybe $2,500, maybe $10,000 to the project, depending on the scale of the project. Now you end up with this situation where it is you think you got the lowest price, but then the building inspector comes in on the project and says, well, this need to be this type of construction, right? And now you have to go through a change because the contractor is not going to pay for that, guys. So that's just something you got to know. If there's any changes, you are responsible for it. Unfortunately, you can't just you can gripe on how much you want about the contractor, but even if he missed it, you hired him, right? So make sure work with the right team of people for sure. So when we are going through this process, we help train our real estate investing clients, whether they're savvy or whether they're junior. We train them on how to read these drawings on a basic level, right? So they must understand some of the things there so that they can at least raise questions to the various parties and they're not just being shoved around and pushed around wherever the wind blows, right? So they really understand that process. So
And
when
I
it
love
goes
that
into
you
it,
said that actually, because I think that is also very important, something
yeah,
that, especially if you're going to be an investor that
yeah,
is doing this at a higher level than maybe just hobby, I find it very important to actually like that be able, I always like saying it, even like learning the different languages of each type of person, because you're right, like knowing the
right,
drawings, for example, or even knowing how to like communication, let's say between you and I become easier because we understand each other, right? Same thing with the contractors, they have their own
right,
language, inspectors, whatever it is, they all have the way they do things, and it just makes things smoother and easier to push along,
correct.
especially if this is something that you're going to do a little bit more than just
That's
maybe
right.
once in a blue moon. So I'm glad you brought that up, but I just wanted to reiterate that because I also find that very important, that if you're going to get into it,
Mhm.
I think it's very important to just understand every part, even like the lawyers, accountants, like
Mhm.
there always need to be a certain level of understanding and knowledge so that like that you're either not being pushed around or at least you're making the right informed decisions. Because sometimes when we don't understand things, that also becomes an issue with making the right decision to things because we don't understand it well enough until, like you said, it's done. And then you're like, oh, that's what you meant.
Yes, yes. And you raise such a good point there. Don't we try not to shame our clients into thinking that they're not smart enough. I mean, listen, I am not that smart. I am smart at what I do because I do a lot of it, right? But I'm not smart in everything. But with that said, I really try to make it seem that this is okay to ask me as many questions as possible. Doesn't matter what it is. Because why? Yes, I spent 8 years educating myself in construction, and then I worked another 15 years in this field. There's little I don't know about low-rise construction. And if this is just your first property and you're a dentist, right? Like chances are you don't know the stuff that I know about buildings. So ask me whatever you want, and I'll take as much time to elaborate on it just to make sure you have an understanding, because at some point, this may just be knowledge that you need to have handy in the event someone else is trying to tell you something different, right? So we really think that's important. And, especially when working with contractors, you should have someone on your side like myself who understands, so I can explain everything to the contractor. And that's something that we offer as part of our service as well. Just at the end of the whole approval or issuance process of the building permit, we then do an offboarding call, very similar to what we're doing here. And then we go through all aspects of the drawings that were reviewed. We look at any red marks, and it can be a lot of documents, right? There's a lot of pages. Most people don't go through that in detail enough, and contractors definitely don't. So with that said, and listen, I'm not knocking contractors. I'm saying like these guys are specialized in other areas, right? So you just need to make sure that you can fill the void, or you get someone else that can fill that void of making sure that everything is compliant when it's completed. Because then that leads us to the fourth group of people, right? Which is the building inspectors, who are actually, they're a good mix of everyone that I mentioned before, right? Because some of them understand the pinch points for real estate investors, meaning they may say like, oh, you know what? I understand you're spending money. Don't worry, don't cut this area. It's fine, right? And they may also have most of them have a very in-depth knowledge of the building code, right? Because they would have started as plan examiners before, right? So most of them would understand that. And a lot of them actually be coming into the field, they were actually in the building sector. So they were either contractors or site supers or something like that. So they have a very, very in-depth knowledge about actual construction. So When it comes to that group, I'll say it's definitely one of the most knowledgeable group. Here's something that you got to know about these guys is that they are people too, but they are also, they're in a position of authority. So you got to make them your best friend because they can actually make your project fail or they can make it succeed, and they can make life hell. So maybe taking a step back, I'll say a contractor also needs to have strong communication skills to work with these inspectors, or else your project will be derailed, right?
100%. That's another thing I completely agree with. I want to emphasize because I do hear a lot of investors that they go through all this like drama stuff.
Yeah.
And like that, sometimes it's either you yourself that you spoke to them and like you said, you know, the way you speak to them, whatever, you rub them the wrong way and they'll just try to make your life harder. Same thing, like if your contractor does that. So it is the people skills. I feel like you know you're an amazing speaker if your you know inspectors are good, right? If they're happy with you. I mean, sometimes you get ones that are in a bad mood that day, but even still, like usually you just kind of like, you know, because it's like the amount of people that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And then if they're dealing with someone rude or something, you know, and then they come to you, their mind is somewhere else. So it's just like understanding that too, because it's like that they have so much power and they like to use it if they want to, you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's why I say, you know, my training, particularly as a BCI designer, as an architectural technologist, as a construction manager, has equipped me over the years to speak these guys' languages. You know, it would be very difficult for me if I were to go to Spain, right? Like it would be difficult to me to communicate, to navigate their surrounding. Maybe not so much because people will speak English and so forth, but you understand what I'm saying. I would have to speak the native language. Well, the native language of construction, designer construction, the native language is actually blueprint reading. You must learn how to understand blueprint reading. And even further to that, you have to understand all the other punctuations and inflections and so forth. And that's what we would call the Ontario Building Code and zoning bylaws. So basically, when you bring all those together, now you can speak the same language as a building inspector. And I'll say this, I feel like, you know, we were fortunate enough to renovate 24 properties between 2019 and 2022. And I felt like the biggest thing, I mean, the drawings part is great and everything like that, but the biggest thing was being able to forge a strong relationship with the building inspectors, and being able to do, the ability to do so really stems from your ability to speak their language, right? It's like someone walks into this room and starts speaking a different language. You're not necessarily going to ignore them, but you just don't understand them. Right. And that's what happens.
And a lot of miscommunication happens that way, right? Because you're speaking one language, they're speaking the other. Translation just doesn't work out well. And that being said, I also wanted to emphasize one more thing that I think is also important is don't get scared from this. And I'm talking to obviously the viewers. Don't get scared of all we're saying, or especially, you know, what Ron is saying, because one of the things, especially that Ron said at the beginning, is you also want to find people that will answer your questions like Ron does, right? Like you want that in every level, especially if you're a new investor, you want at every level, all the different people, except for the inspector, but all the different people involved in your team, you want them, especially as a new investor, like if they're getting mad at you, they don't want to answer your questions, because this also happens in the contractor world where some contractors just want to get the work done and they don't want to deal with someone asking questions, but the thing is that we are real estate investors and we're not homeowners where, you know, homeowners, they do maybe once, twice in their life, you know, we are doing this a lot more regularly. So we do have we do need to learn at a much higher level, all the different areas, and be able to speak to different types of people in the ways so that we're conveying what we need from them. So finding, especially like that, as new investors, you want to find people that can answer questions, that are willing to do that, and don't get frustrated with you, because that's like the pivotal part to getting you to move forward and actually learning quicker if you have people like that work with you, and you start and then like that the building of the relationships happen. So I just wanted to emphasize that again, just because there is a lot to learn, but at the same time, you're not alone. There's a team. You just have to make sure you're picking the right people. Putting the right circle of people around you becomes so important in these kind of things so that you succeed.
That's right. Well, I could not have said it better. Your team is going to determine your success, so truly make sure that you're selecting the right people. And again, that decision should not be made on cost. Cost is certainly a factor, but it's not the only factor. You want to make sure that you can speak with someone that is amiable, someone that is respectful, and someone that you can have a difficult conversation with. Right, because oftentimes if you can't have a difficult conversation, things will fall flat, right? So with that said, I would just say also, when just wrapping up the fourth group of people here, which is the building inspector, is that you want to just make sure building inspectors, very knowledgeable people. You want to make sure that you're working very closely with them to get the job done, because they are ultimately they're the gatekeepers, to be quite honest. They're the ones that are going to give you your occupancy so that your building can be utilized for that ultimately achieves your end goal. And if your building inspector does not grant you that, or creates a whole bunch of ambiguous type of requirements that ultimately leads to major delays on your project, that's no good. So make sure that you're in a good standing with your building inspector. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to show up to a building inspection with your contractor just to observe. You're not going to have any input, but just to observe. Sometimes that can be impactful, because the inspector realizes that there's a person behind this work as well, right? So,
and being open with them too, I think, right? If you say that you're here to learn, or I feel like they'll be a little more calmer with you, because they understand that it's your first time, or you're just learning, or you're just observing. So that, I think communication is always great to kind of help, especially for those first time investors, because if you don't have that, like if you don't say anything, they may think you know what you're doing, and then they'll think you're stupid. But if you tell them, I actually have no idea what I'm doing, I'm coming to learn, then they're like, oh, okay, now they're coming with more of a teacher mindset. Okay, let me make sure that I'm saying things in a way that they'll understand, or maybe explaining a little bit more, just so that they understand why I'm saying what it's doing. Like, those kind of things also kind of go a long way. And again, any kind of person, right? Even you would probably be like, okay, let me, if you're talking to someone more experienced, you'll probably go into more terminology, because you know them, exactly, they know the language already, right?
Yes.
But if someone comes to you and says, this is my first time doing a permit, then you will start now thinking, okay, let me explain things a little bit more, or the thought process is a little bit different, right? Because you're now thinking, okay, this is someone that doesn't understand everything that I'm used to talking about, so we're gonna have to go back to the basics of permits, where the side.
Back to the basics on the flip side. But I absolutely agree with you there, and I want to say this just to reassure people as well, that converting properties, renovating a property, getting a building permit is really not rocket science. I'm not sitting here to basically judge anyone and make anyone feel like they're incapable. It just requires some effort. And I would say, when I started this business, I'm coming from design and construction, but when I started this business 7 years ago, right, there's just so much I did not know. Right? There's just so much that I did not know, and I had to learn on the ground. And even after running this business for 3 years, 2020, we started the construction piece of things, primarily so that when we do the construction, we would go through the inspection process, so that we would then be able to do a feedback loop into our drawings and update our drawings to reflect what inspectors were looking for. Right? So we had 3 years of doing that, which actually helped us to evolve our drawings now to the point where it's super detailed. And our drawings are detailed not because we're trying to impress the owners, or we're trying to impress the contractors or the building inspectors or anything like that. It's really detailed so that we can reduce the amount of questions, and our drawings can be utilized as a tool for learning. All our drawings are very detailed, and it's just so much information on there that will help people understand how these things are built. So there's always opportunity to learn. Don't shy away from it. You just have to make sure you work with people that are going to sort of facilitate that learning process. And before you know it, in a very short period of time, you're going to have the confidence and capacity to do this like a professional. So that would be my tip to these guys.
100%. And so, what about curious? I think we finished all the four, right?
We have gone through the four. I mean, I can dive much deeper, but sure.
No, I think that's good. I wanted to now go into a little bit more basic things too, just so people are aware of like time frames. You know, what do you see usually? Let's say time frames of different types of projects. Like from like what's probably like the smallest kind of project, and what would the time frame be on average? Because I know that also obviously changes per city, but just to give people ideas of like the kind of project and the duration for your work and for the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a very unique process in our back end. So we like technology. Like here at Property Pathway, I'm a technology junkie. I got it all from the Oculus all the way to and we use it all for our design process. So we do everything in 3D model. We collect all our data on site using a reality capture device. So we do 3D laser scanning. We use 3D modeling when we're doing our presentation and everything like that. I will say this, though we use all this technology, once we're finished using it and the client has had the ability to engage us in all this sort of immersive sort of technology, we then have to dumb that down because the city will not receive a sort of a file that has all that information. So we have to dumb down our 3D model into a flat PDF 2-dimension so that it can then be reviewed. Why am I saying that? Is because that is actually very inefficient. And I know that they're working on methods to actually start implementing 3D models, like that's what we do, into the review process, which will actually help to make that process faster. So rather than asking questions about what's the size of a door, you can just open the 3D model and just go through it, select the door, it tells you what size the door is, right? And that's how it would work. But with that said, in most cities today, that's the standard process of reviewing drawings. You're looking at a rough timeline for it depends on the type of project. If it's a residential single family home, you have to wait 10 days until the city even looks at the drawing. That's regulated by the Ontario Building Code Act, right? Then if you are doing sort of a multifamily, like a 2 units or more, then they will not look at those drawings. They're not required to look at those drawings until 15 business days. And of course, if you're doing any type of ICI type of project, it'll take 30 business days before they even look at those drawings. So once they look at the drawings, most people think like they looked at the drawings, I'm getting my permits. Hold on, pump the brakes a little bit here. What's going to happen next is that there will likely be what we call the first cycle review. So they will come back almost indefinitely. They come back with comments. Their comments is usually for clarification on some item on the drawing, or maybe they're requesting additional documentation. So you got to make sure that you just know that your drawings are going to have a first cycle. Why am I saying that? Because once it comes back on that first cycle, then the city does not have a time when they need to review the drawing again. There's no timeline. They can take a month, they can take a year. I mean, it doesn't take that long. What we have found, it usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks before they come back with the final comment. So it's really important for me and my team here to make sure that, and when comments come back, it could be for payments as well, but when comments come back, that we address it completely and we answer even everything, including over and above that they may be asking, just to make sure that they don't come back again, because that's going to just add another 3-week cycle onto it. So generally speaking, our design services, from the time you engage our service, we have an executed agreement. From the time you engage us, and that's from that point, it takes us about 3 weeks to get the permits into the city, 3 weeks to a month, depending on how quickly we get through. Well, I used to say it depends on how quickly or how decisive the client is on the design part. Once we get it into the city, then it takes 3 weeks until they look at the drawing, and then in most cases another 3 weeks until they get back to reviewing the comments that they had asked for, and then the permit is issued. So I would say best case a client is looking at on a project is usually about 6 weeks. Worst case, well, I would say worst case can be anything, but typically standard, they're looking at around 8 weeks to 10 weeks, right? For building permit in hand from the moment they engage our services, right?
This is for residential.
This is for residential. On the commercial side is not very much different. I will say that on the commercial side, sometimes some of the comments they come back with can be extremely erroneous. That's like ambiguous. Think of any of the others, laborious. Like they can just ask for some really ridiculous stuff when they come back on commercial projects, but ultimately it can all be solved. And I will say this, the building department, city staff cannot comment on design. So they cannot comment on design. So the comments that we receive are usually very vague in nature and they don't offer explanation. And that's one of the core reasons why you must hire a designer, because the city will not comment on design. They will just give you some building code reference and you have to find out what that means and how to resolve that, right? So
this is on the commercial side. So on the residential, they're a little bit better. They actually give you more information, it sounds like, but
no, not at all. So they're not at all. They're actually trained as part of, they're not allowed to do design work. So they're not allowed to tell you, well, you can move this wall here and put, like, they're not allowed to do that at all, because now they become liable.
Meeting these requirements, kind of a thing.
They'll just say like this needs to meet section 8 point whatever, right? 9.5.5.2 or whatever. And now you got to go in there and you got to figure out what that section is saying and how can I resolve that based on the actual design that is completed. So most people don't understand how to do that, and that's why they hire someone like myself, right? But just hopefully that answers your question. Timeline is about I say 6 weeks to 10 weeks on the longer end. So let's make sure that you're adding that to your carrying cost for a low rise construction. If you're doing a high rise, not high rise, but mid rise or mixed use type building, you probably want to allocate about 3 months. I would say 3 months to 4 months for your review process if you engage our service, because that's about how long it would take. And as I said, if they come back for any additional type of studies or work, maybe they come back and they say, well, we need a water runoff study here. Well, that's something that, we'll just have to engage you, the client, and say, well, this is what the city is asking specifically. So let's go ahead and do that. But hopefully we're able to advise you of these things in advance and decide whether we want to preemptively get them done or if we're going to wait until the city comes back to us first.
Awesome. Yeah. Any other final things that you want to leave the viewers with?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, one of the really core things that we take pride in is the fact that we utilize 3D models for our projects, all our projects, regardless of it. If it's a deck to if it's a 5-story building, we utilize 3D, not only laser scanning, but 3D design. And that actually really helps us to identify any challenges we may have in advance from a clash detection standpoint and so forth. So we want to make sure that structure is not interacting with HVAC or plumbing in some sort of weird way. And we can do that all visually looking at the design, which actually really informs the construction end. So you front load the process. And even though that's not really practiced in residential, as I mentioned, I'm coming from the commercial world. So that's kind of, I've utilized and seen this technology in work for the last 15 years in big scale companies. And we have just compressed it down and bringing that to the market for small scale real estate developers, right? And then my final comment would be, when working with a designer or your team, any member of your team needs to understand what it is your end goal is, and they must have had significant experience doing exactly that. Because if not, they will not be able to advise you on some of the nuances. And there are hundreds of them that only a skilled, trained person would be able to identify. So your contractor should be able to read drawings. Your designer should be able to understand construction and inspection. Your mortgage broker should be able to do the same, understand what sites are suitable, and your realtor should be able also to feed back into that whole process and see the whole vision of your goal. So, or else you'll ultimately end up with things that you're stuck with and not have a solution. So feel free to reach out to me, guys. I'm a wealth of information for sure, but I really like talking about this type of stuff in particular.
Awesome. And where can they reach you?
Now, the best place you can reach me is on our Instagram. I know I'm on LinkedIn. My Instagram handle is Property Pathways, right? Property Pathways. You can reach me through our contact form on our website at propertypathways.ca as well. You can also reach me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, you can message me there. I'll definitely get back to you as well. Yeah, so those are kind of the main ways people get in contact with me, but I try to post content frequently, so I'm always adding a lot of value in there. Chances are, if you have a question concerning 2-unit conversion, 3 units or 4-unit conversions, or new build garden suites, anything related to the design or construction of a property or renovation of a property, and for a real estate investor, I've probably spoken about it at some point in the past few months.
Awesome. Thanks very much for sharing the information. If you guys love what you heard, we will actually having Ron come on to our networking event in September. So, and we'll be talking about permits. We'll be going into a lot more detail. And he'll also be tagged on this video. So if you also want to follow him, you can also do that. And we'll also be sending out the information in August. You'll hear about the information for September for Ron to be speaking on getting into the details, getting into the nitty-gritties. Thanks so much, Ron, for coming on. It was so awesome to have you on.
Thank you. It was really fun chatting with you, Diana.
Awesome. And if you guys love this show, send us some love, send us some hearts. Let us know if you have any questions, and follow me, and you'll be able to see everything that I'm up to, all my different shows. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all in the next episode. Bye, everyone.